If you thought last year's 6-week federal election campaign was long, spare a thought for those voting in this year's US presidential poll. The race for the White House has been already going for more than a year, and it still has 6 months to go. But it's not just those living in the US who are keeping an eye on the campaign. It's also the millions of US citizens living abroad in places like Tasmania. Simon Cullen caught up with a few who are amazed at the high level of interest the US election is getting in Tasmania.
It's an election campaign, but not as we know it. Hundreds of millions of dollars spent on campaigning, extraordinary hype, and several years in the making. It's the US presidential election. It's a race that's being watched closely around the globe.
You know, when America sneezes, Australia catches cold. And that's one of the reasons why I take great interest in American politics. But when the American legislation very definitely impacts what's going to happen here in Australia.
Jack Sonneman moved from the US 25 years ago and lives in Tasmania's Midlands. Despite the distance, he remains a keen member of the Republican Party and votes in American elections.
People need to be involved in politics. They need to know what's going on, know what laws are being passed, because we have to raise our children in the culture that we're handing them. And the culture is determined by the laws that we pass in our parliaments. So more of us need to be concerned about politics.
Christine Jolly moved to Australia last year and has no plans to return to the US.
I think as long as I'm a citizen of one country, I have a responsibility toward it. It doesn't mean that I'll always be a citizen of America, but as long as I am, I'll do my part to influence my heritage and my country. And then if I do become an Australian citizen, I'll be much more inclined to focus on things here rather than abroad, I think.
It's not just US citizens following the presidential race. Some Australians are showing almost as much interest in this American campaign as they do in domestic politics.
But I've got more and more people all the time who know I'm American that come up to me out here in the Midlands, in fact all over Tasmania, and talk about this election. This election seems to have spurred up interest like no other election in my memory.
I think Americans would be surprised how much the world actually takes interest in what they do, because they do tend to be seen as a bubble only caring about themselves and their own interests. They don't realize that other people are that much interested in them and what goes on. So as an American, sometimes it confuses me. I don't know why they care.
There's probably a couple of reasons. I think the contest is very close, so it makes it much more exciting. I think the fact that there's a woman candidate and an African-American candidate makes it more intriguing and, again, more exciting.
Can candidates change their attributes without looking as though they're sort of gender flip-flopping?
It's interesting because clearly the change was triggered by September 11.
Associate Professor Patricia Sykes from the American University in Washington, D.C. is on scholarship in Australia for several months.
I think Australians believe they're affected. I think much of the world feels somewhat vulnerable, I think, to the selection of the American president. And so they're unable to participate in the election, but I think they care very much. Obviously, after 8 years of the Bush administration, it's very clear to people that the decisions the American president makes have serious ramifications for the rest of the world.
As for who will win the US presidency,
Madam President!
Just as in America, opinion here is divided.
And so far, I'm somewhat pleased with Obama, but I would not vote for Hillary Clinton. She's too extreme on too many issues.
Mr. McCain is going to be the next president of the U.S., John McCain.
It's a long road to 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue.
There's only 6 more months until we know who's right.
Artist Mandy Renard is